Commissioner, the first question I wanted to ask you is about some news that came out of Massachusetts yesterday. Governor Charlie Baker and the state's education commissioner in Massachusetts are now pushing for elementary school students to be fully in person 5 days a week in their classrooms come April. What would a similar action, if you decided to take that step here in Rhode Island, what would that mean for elementary school students in the Ocean State? And is that something that you would consider mandating that all kids be in their classrooms come April?
So we prioritized elementary schools. So we don't have the same issues that Massachusetts does, thankfully. We understood how important it was. So that's something that we've had in play for a very long time. We're glad they're joining us.
So for folks who might not know, and please remind me as well, how many elementary school kids are full in person in their classroom 5 days a week right now in Rhode Island?
The majority of them. The majority of them. Where we have more hybrid models is in the high school, and that's part of because of the distancing and some middle schools. But in the elementary school, almost all of them are 5 days a week in person. Obviously, when we quarantine or there are different situations happen, but that's been the case from the beginning.
So knowing what we know about middle school and high school being a little bit different, would you consider wanting to fast track those students being fully in person before the end of the year? Should we expect to see any changes made to the current protocols before the end of this school year?
Well, there might be. I think our numbers are going down. I think we're in a different place. And the schools did that because of the distancing, right? And I think that was the major concern. And we have seen that we have not seen these major outbreaks in schools. Our data looks good. So, and it's not many places that have the hybrid. It all depends on each district. So I think we will have different discussions about that. But we're, from the very beginning, we've been looking at our data. We're minding what that looks like. I think it also comes into play vaccinations, so there's a lot of factors here.
One thing I was seeing on some parent forums on social media was a concern that if Massachusetts does decide to go in this direction, that it would mean that they would remove the remote or hybrid learning option for parents. I know that's not the case, that they're still allowing that option in Massachusetts. Is there any consideration to remove the remote or hybrid learning option for parents in Rhode Island before the end of this school year?
Not right now. That's not a conversation that we're having, no.
What about for the fall? Should parents still expect to have that option in the fall?
Well, if our numbers look good and we've finished with the vaccinations, I think that we are looking forward to full in person. I think, like I've said before, and like the way that we've actually done this is really looking at our numbers. What are the mitigations? What are the things we're seeing? Are the teachers all fully vaccinated at that point so that we can have more kids in the classroom? So all those kinds of questions need to be answered.
I know Governor Gina Raimondo was a big advocate of in-person learning. Have you had any conversations with incoming Governor Dan McKee about his priorities, what he thinks about where students should be?
Well, I think we all agree and we all know that in-person learning is better. Everyone agrees with that. So I think that there's really no debate about that. It's how we do it that I think is going to be really important. And like I said, we have been in person. I think these are conversations that other states are having. And I have to be very honest with you. When I go to my meetings with other states, they're talking about figuring out how to come back for the first time in a year. We're not there. We're really not there. We have been doing this. Our districts have been phenomenal. The teachers have been outstanding. So we're just in a different place than other states. And I'm very proud of the work that we've done here. We have all prioritized in-person learning.
You mentioned, some students haven't been back in their classrooms in a year in other places. I did want to take some time to sort of look back on the past year as we approach the 1-year anniversary of the first identified case of COVID-19 in Rhode Island. Take me back, if you can, to last March. I believe it was less than a day between when the governor said, you know what, I'm not ready to close schools, to when she had the press conference with you right there by her side saying, we're going to at least temporarily close schools. Of course, we know now that schools never returned until the fall. So can you walk me through sort of what was going on behind the scenes during that time and just how difficult of a decision that was to make?
It was a very difficult decision because I think none of us really knew we were going to encounter. But what we did know is that we did have this trip that came back, this school. It was a private school, but we shared a bus with the statewide. So we quickly understood that we needed to work together. And then we started seeing that a teacher from the traditional public school went on this trip as a chaperone. And then we had to quarantine that school just as we were getting information. And it just became, that was a very tough week where we realized that we needed to do something. The good thing about it is that we were one of the early states. And I know that sounds crazy to say that, but because our first case was actually in February, we were able to kind of plan a little bit. We already had a rubric in place. We were able to say, this vacation, let's just make sure that we plan. So we were in a little better place than other states. But that was a really tough decision. And we didn't know how long, right? We thought maybe a month, maybe 2 months. And then it turned out to be the whole school year. And during that time, we learned a great deal. We got better at distance learning, but we also knew that this couldn't be what we did for the incoming school year. We knew that couldn't be the case. Not because of what was taking place wasn't good. It just doesn't work for everyone, right? The teachers were trying their best. The kids were trying their best. But we saw, that kids were off screen. Kids were not even changing into their clothes in the morning. It was just really tough, right? It's tough. This has all been very, very difficult. But the good thing about Rhode Island and what sets us apart, and I want people to hear this, because now with my time being in Rhode Island, Rhode Islanders are a little bit cynical, right? We don't like to pat ourselves on the back. And this is one time that we do deserve that. Has it been perfect? No. But we did it. We did it. When I hear people still talking about air quality and we say, hey, you could put a HEPA filter, and they're like, oh, great. Yeah, we figured that out months ago. We can do this. We can. So we have a lot of states reaching out to us, trying to learn from us. So I want us to take a moment to thank everyone that has made this happen. The teachers that have been resilient, the superintendents, the principals, the parents that, even though they were nervous, said, I want my kid in school. So I think we're in a much better place than Massachusetts.
You talked sort of about the lessons learned over this past year. Sometimes our current education system gets some criticism, early start times. It hasn't really changed with the 21st century. Maybe we should be doing more online. What do you think we've learned about the current education structure for educating our kids?
The fact that we need to change it. So I'm glad you brought up that question, because what this has forced us to do is to be innovative. I went to one of the districts, and one of the teachers said to me, this is forced innovation. And he was right. We have to push ourselves. When I first came here, I was at a school where a child said to me, well, not a child, a high schooler said, I missed my first period class because I have to work construction with my family. When the jobs are there, that's when I need to go to work. So this child was forced to make the decision of having to work or coming to his first period class. Why do we have to do that? Why can't we be flexible enough? Why? We know we can do that now. Maybe that class is taken online, and then the rest of the classes are in person. I think we just have to be flexible. What we had prior to the pandemic was okay in some places and terrible in others. So this is an opportunity for us to really reinvent what kids need and what parents want to see in their school system. So let's think out of the box. That's the way I'm approaching this. We're not talking about learning loss. We're talking about really accelerating learning. How do we give our kids the different opportunities that we all want for them? So that's what we're going to be working and concentrating on.
You mentioned learning loss, and we spoke with a local economist the other day who estimates that it's going to take 3 to 5 years for the local economy to recover. When you look at the state of education, the state of our students, their learning, their psychological, emotional, social growth, how many years or months, or maybe it's not even that long, what do you think the recovery time is for our students following what's been an unprecedented year?
Well, that's hard to say, but that's why I really like to look at data. Data is really important for me because everybody talks about gaps, learning loss. Well, how do we know? If we're not measuring it, how do we know? We're predicting 3 months, 4 months, but for a child that was already 3 years behind or 2 years behind, this might be a 5 year gap now. So we need to know what that looks like. So measuring it is really important because if not, we're just guessing. I think, we're putting out surveys for students to see the social emotional piece. We're investing in that area. That's really important because I think that's going to be one of our biggest challenges is how do we support kids as they come back and the adults in the building? It's a tough challenge for all of us. So that's where we are. That's the work we're doing.
Talk me through a big challenge or a particularly hard day or moment in time that sticks out in your mind. I know there were many, but maybe there was one that sticks out in your mind as being, that day, I wouldn't want to relive that day.
The day we made the decisions to close the schools, I think that was a hard day. I think the governor and I must have spoken at least 15 times. Is it the right thing? Is it not the right thing? What are we going to do? How do we do this? What about the busing? What about, that was a really intense day. And it wasn't just with her, it was talking to everybody. And that was hard. That was hard. And it snowballed from there. It got harder and harder. It felt like an avalanche every single day. That was the day that our lives completely changed. And, you never know. And at that moment, we didn't know. And I have to tell you that I didn't sleep for 3 days thinking, did we make the right decision? And I think people forget that we worry about those things, right? We want to do what's right. And we could only move with our conscience and lead with our conscience. And that's what we tried to do. And I know not everybody's happy all the time. But I have to tell you that I can tell you where I was sitting when we had that last conversation, what I was wearing. It was that difficult a day.
Wow. On the other side of the coin, I'm sure there have been some bright spots, something that sticks out in your mind as being a success or a good day.
A good day. So I think we've had a couple of good days. Well, more than a couple. So going into the classroom and seeing the kids being excited about being in school, that feels good. Looking at the data when we did the surveillance testing and when we started collecting the data of who was positive, if there was spread, that was exciting, right? Because we didn't know. At the end of the day, we kept hearing what experts were telling us, but we really didn't know. We knew that if we mitigated, and then the numbers started to bear exactly what we had planned for. And that was an amazing moment. Those, when we did the pilot of surveillance testing, that was also an amazing moment, and then we compared it to the PCR and 1%, 1.4, like, what is that? That's crazy. That means that what we put in place worked. Is it perfect? By no means. But I think that we're in a much, and I keep repeating this, much better place than the rest of the nation. Rahm Emanuel talked about it, no judgment on anything, but I mean, it's gotten to the national stage that we should be sort of the blueprint for other states.
What am I neglecting to ask? What else would you like to let people know about the past year, the challenges, the triumphs? What do you think people at home maybe might not realize or might not know? Anything else you'd like to add?
So I think what people don't realize that we do listen, right? We cannot respond to every single email and every single conversation, but we do listen. We take all those things into consideration. And at the end of the day, everybody's trying their best, everyone, and everybody's putting their best foot forward. And I have to tell you, you asked me what my best day was, and I haven't sent a thank you card to this mother, but I am going to. she sent me a card. And I remember being in my office and opening it up, and it was about her daughter. And it was kind of like a Wonder Woman in the front. And I was having a crummy day. Because it's, I use this analogy with my kids all the time. It's easy to throw a pitch from the stands and the bleachers, but you got to be in the game, right? It's easy to tell people what they're doing incorrectly when they're not the ones doing it. And her words really filled me. I have that card framed. It's those little things that really matter, because everybody's trying their best. So I really have to get back to that parent. And somebody else sent me a prayer for school opening. Those things are important. We're trying our best. So those were really important days for me. And what parents don't know, and everybody else doesn't know, is that everybody's working 24 hours a day. Like, our meetings don't end at 5, 6, 7 o'clock, to make sure that we do the best job possible. So that's where we're moving. And the last thing I do want to share, and I know that you asked me this before, is, we're really trying to innovate. We're really trying to be one of the best states when it comes to education. And that means that we have to think differently, right? And we don't want status quo. We don't want to be in that same place. And change is difficult. I know that. There's growing pains, but there's no going back. There just is no going back for us.
Commissioner, I just want to ask you quickly about a bill that was heard last night in committee about field trips. This has been a source of confusion, I feel like, for districts and also parents. This bill would allow districts to solicit parents for donations, which I understand is something they can already do. So does this bill just sort of clarify that? And what do you think of this proposal?
It does clarify it, because the districts could always ask for donations. What you can't do is leave a child that can't pay for the trip if it's an educational trip, right? So I think there's a difference. You can ask parents to donate. If they can, then they will. But it's about leaving that child behind. That's the piece. But there are districts that have been doing this already, that have it in their forms. They can ask for donations. It's very different to say, I need you to pay this amount, as opposed to, this is the suggested donation. So we are very much in favor of the bill. I think it provides clarity. I think it also gives superintendents the ability to maneuver this situation a little differently.
Commissioner, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kim.